For the next design challenge with MicroBit's introduction, we are going to create a digital dice with at least 6 options that displays the random value after an input signal is received. So again, we're going to be using a triggering event, some sort of trigger, a button press, a shake, a logo press to send an input signal. Once that's happened, then we need to display the result of a random number generator for our digital dice. So to do this, I'm going to get started by once again minimizing my simulator, and I will collapse our comment and just stick it off to the side here. We could break display a random number down into multiple steps, and we'll do that for option 2, but it turns out this is enough information, these are enough steps to be able to actually code this. So our first option, we're going to get rid of our onStart block because we don't need to instantiate anything. We're going to get rid of forever because all we have in our pseudocode is a triggering event that makes a thing happen. When this trigger goes, this stuff happens. So to get started, we're going to go to Input, and we're going to scroll down, and under MicroBit version 2, where the logo can be pressed, we're going to click on Logo Pressed. So on Logo Pressed, what should happen? Well, we go back to our pseudocode. On logo pressed, we want to display a random number, and I'm going to call random here out because we're going to have to use that as a component or an attribute of the number. So we're first going to go to basic, and you'll notice our very first block there is show number. So if we just drop that in and we pull our simulator back out, we can test this by pressing the logo, and you'll see it just shows the number. And if we change the attribute, the value of the number here to say 8, it will do the same thing. It'll just show the value of that number. But what we're wanting is a random number that displays options 1 through 6. So what we need to do is go into math, just like we did in the last design challenge. We're going to pick a random number. We'll pull this block out, and we'll place that function in the attribute or in the value for show number. So show number, and we're going to pick a random number from 1 to 6. Now in our simulator, we can see that indeed this works. We're going to click on our logo, get a 6, we'll click it again, we rolled another 6, now we rolled a 3, now we rolled a 1, a 6, and so we can see that seems to be working just fine. When we do that right now, we get a number like a digit, and that doesn't look like a dice. So what if we wanted it to look like a dice, where we have a series of dots that represent the numerical value? Well, to do that, we'll call this option 2. And for option 2, we're still going to need a triggering event. And we'll let this, just so we can run these at the same time, we'll let this be button A is pressed. But once that event is triggered, what should happen? Well, that event should trigger simply the selection of a random number. So we're going to set a variable to a random number between 1 and 6. Now, once we have a variable set, what do we want to do? Well, we're going to use some of the same logic we used with rock, paper, scissors. But in this case, we're going to put that in the forever block because we'd like to forever show the last dice roll. So we're going to go into our in forever block. Here's what we want to have happen. Inside of here, we need to have a condition for each of the possibilities. So we'll write a few of these out. We'll say if the random number is equal to 1, then show, and we're going to show the image for 1. And then we're basically going to do the exact same thing here, so we can just copy and paste this in our pseudocode. But now we're going to check for, is it 2? And if so, we'll display the image for 2. And is it 3? And if so, we'll display the image for 3, and so on. And so what we can see that's going to happen here is we expect a triggering event. In this case, we're going to press button A. Sort of behind the scenes inside the MicroBit, it's going to set a variable to a random number that is valued between 1 and 6. And then in our forever block, it's going to constantly be looking to see, was that random number equal to 6? If the random number is equal to 1. If it is equal to 1, then we're going to display the image. We're going to show LEDs for 1. If it's 2, we'll show the LEDs for 2, and so on. So let's go ahead and build that out as well. So for this, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here, and I'm going to move my logo up and away, and I'll close the simulator just so we can see a little bit more screen. Also get the comment out of the way. And now I'm going to go into input, and now I'll go to on button A pressed. And I'm going to go into forever, or into basic, and pull out a forever block, as I know I'm going to need that as well. So on button A pressed, let's go back to our pseudocode. What's supposed to happen? A variable is supposed to get a value between 1 and 6. So I'd start by making a variable. So I'm going to go to variable, make a new variable. I'll call that random number. And now I get access to that as a variable. I'm going to pull out this block, set random number 2. So on button A pressed, I want to set random number 2, and I'm going to use this exact same attribute block for my random number generator. So I can hover over that, get it to turn white. I can right click it and press duplicate. And then I can take that and drop that into where the number was. So set random number, instead of to a static value or a constant value, I want to set it to a random value between 1 and 6. Now, forever, I want to be checking what is the value of random number, and then I want to display the appropriate image based on that value. So I'm going to have a really long if-else statement. So I'll grab this if-else block. I'll drop it in. I'm going to go ahead and go into logic and grab a comparison block that checks for equality. So I grab that and I'll drag it in. And now what am I looking for? I'm looking to see if, let's go back to our pseudocode, if the value of random number is equal to 1. So I want the value of this variable random number. So I'm going to go to variables, random number, and you'll notice it's round and fits nicely in the oval shape here. If random number is equal to 1, then what should happen? Well, I need to then show LEDs the image for 1. So I'm going to go to basic, show LEDs. I'll drop that in my first if, and we'll draw the image for 1. So make it look like a die with value of 1. Now I notice right now I've just got if it's 1, and then else, anything else, I would do this, but I can hit the plus sign and I can get more ifs. Else, if it's not 1, then if it's, and I could put in a new comparison block. So I'll copy and paste that. I can use Command or Control C, Control V on a keyboard, or I can right click that shape and click duplicate. I'll grab that and drop it into my comparison. So else if random number is equal to 2. What should happen? Well, I should show LEDs, so I'll duplicate this block, but instead of showing 1 LED, I want to show LEDs for the value of 2. So I'll show 2. And now I still see, now I've got a condition for when random number is 1 or 2, but there's 3, 4, 5, and 6 left, so I need more conditions. So there would be for 3 and 4, here's for 5, and here's for 6. I'll just go ahead and click the plus sign a few times. Now I'm going to click on this conditional comparison, and I'll duplicate that again. I'll drop it in here, and I'll change this value to 3. I'll go ahead and do that for the next 2. So I'll duplicate, change it to 4, and I'll duplicate one more time and change it to 5. I don't have to, as we discussed in the previous design challenge, I don't need to have a comparison for 6, because if the dice can only, if the random number can only hold a value 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, and if I've got checks for is it 1, is it 2, is it 3, 4, or 5, then the only remaining option would be 6. So I'll duplicate my show LEDs window or block. I need to now draw that for 3. So I'll draw for 3 here. I'll duplicate that one. and drop it in the 4 spot, and I'll draw it for 4. And I'll duplicate that one. I'll drop it in the 5 spot, draw this for 5, and then finally, as we mentioned, if it's not 1 through 5, then it has to be 6, so we can draw our 6 dots here. Now, I want to call out, this doesn't necessarily have to happen under the forever block, and in fact, because I've done this with both options in the same code, it might make more sense to move this if under the A button so we don't get complications between the logo pressed and the forever. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that if and just drag that whole big if statement under button A pressed. So every time button A is pressed, random number gets a new value, and based on that value, it's going to display one of these sets of LEDs. When the logo is pressed, it's going to do what we saw earlier, and it's just going to show the digit, the number of the value. So I'll pull my simulator back out. The simulator is running. I see that because it's got a stop sign, so the play button makes it run. We'll double check our logo press, and yes, indeed, we get random values between 1 and 6 when the logo is pressed, and we see their digits. When we press A, we get random values displayed as a traditional dice.